Hey everyone, it's Harry, your host. Welcome back. So today I want to talk about something that honestly says a lot more about money ownership and long-term thinking than it does about fame. Beyoncé is officially a billionaire. And yeah, that headline alone is wild. But what's even more interesting is how she actually got there. Because this wasn't some overnight thing, and it definitely wasn't just album sales. There's a part of her story that most people miss, and it has a lot to do with control, patience, and saying no when it would have been easier to say yes. And if you've ever wondered what wealth really looks like behind the scenes, especially at that level, this one's worth paying attention to. Now, when people hear Beyoncé billionaire, the first reaction is usually something like, well, of course she's Beyoncé. She's been famous forever. She sells out stadiums. But that explanation is actually way too simple. A lot of famous artists never get anywhere close to $1 billion. Some of them burn through tens of millions and end up in really bad financial shape. So the real question isn't why Beyoncé is rich, it's why her money lasted, grew, and multiplied over time. And to understand that, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. Beyoncé didn't start as a solo artist. She came up with Destiny's Child in the late 90s, and even back then, she was already learning how the business worked. Her father managed the group, which came with its own ups and downs, but it also meant she was exposed early to contracts, touring logistics, and how money actually flows in the industry. A lot of artists don't see that side until it's too late. So then fast forward to the early 2000s, Destiny's Child winds down and Beyoncé goes solo. Massive success, hit after hit, Grammys, global tours, all of that. But here's where something important happens that doesn't get talked about enough. Around 2010, she makes a really hard decision. She separates from her father professionally and starts building her own company, Parkwood Entertainment. And this is where the story really shifts. Parkwood wasn't just a label or a management firm. It was designed to bring almost everything in-house: touring, films, documentaries, creative direction, production. Instead of handing pieces of her career to different companies and taking a smaller cut, she decided to take on more responsibility in exchange for ownership. Now, that sounds empowering, but it's also risky. When you fund your own tours, your own films, your own projects, you're fronting the money. If it flops, you eat the loss. Most artists don't want that stress. They'd rather take a guaranteed paycheck. But Beyoncé went the other way. And so, yeah, that choice didn't instantly make her a billionaire. In fact, for a while, it probably made things more complicated. But over time, that control meant something huge. It meant she kept the back-end profits. And in entertainment, that's where the real money lives. Now, let's talk about touring, because this is the biggest piece of the puzzle. People still think artists make most of their money from album sales or streaming. Now, that used to be true. It's not anymore. Touring is where the money is, especially for artists who can sell out stadiums. Beyoncé mastered that. Her Renaissance World Tour in 2023 grossed close to $600 million. That's not revenue for the entire industry. That's one tour. And because Parkwood produced it, Beyoncé didn't just get a performer's cut. She captured a much larger share of the profit. And here's a subtle thing that's easy to overlook. She didn't just tour. She turned the tour into multiple revenue streams: the concert itself, the merchandise, and then the film. Renaissance, the concert film, was distributed directly through movie theaters. And because she controlled the deal, she kept nearly half of the box office revenue. That's unheard of for most artists. So already by this point, you can see a pattern. She's not just performing. She's building systems around each creative project. Now here's where things get even more interesting. In 2024, Beyoncé releases Cowboy Carter, a country album. And when that was announced, a lot of people were confused. Some people were skeptical. Country has a very specific audience, and Beyoncé was already dominating pop and R&B. Why take that risk? And this is one of those moments where long-term thinking really shows up. Cowboy Carter wasn't just an album. It was a cultural statement, a history lesson, and a business expansion all rolled into one. It opened up an entirely new market, new fans, new touring opportunities, new merchandising angles. The Cowboy Carter Tour ended up grossing over $400 million, making it the most successful country tour ever. On top of that, merchandise sales alone were estimated around $50 million. And again, because of how it was structured, a large share of that flowed back to her company. Another smart move here was how she toured. Instead of hitting dozens of cities, she did many residencies in a small number of stadiums, multiple nights in the same place. That reduces costs, increases efficiency, and creates scarcity. Fans travel, ticket prices go up, demand stays high. So when Forbes declared her a billionaire in December 2025, it wasn't because of one lucky year. It was because all of these decisions stacked on top of each other over 2 decades. Now, let's talk about her catalog for a second. Beyoncé owns a significant portion of her. That catalog alone has been valued at around $300 million. And unlike a tour, a catalog doesn't get tired. It doesn't need rest. It keeps generating income through streaming, licensing, films, commercials, and future projects. Even though newer artists might have higher streaming numbers in a given year, Beyoncé's catalog has staying power. And in today's industry, touring income can make up 75 to 90% of top artist earnings. She's positioned perfectly for that reality. And then there are the business ventures. Seeker, her haircare brand, Sir Davis, her whiskey, Ivy Park, and fashion. These aren't necessarily the main drivers of her wealth, but they reinforce the brand. They diversify income, and they give her leverage. In 2025 alone, she reportedly earned around $148 million before taxes, including sponsorships and high-profile performances like a Christmas Day NFL halftime show for Netflix. Now, something I want to pause on here because I see this question a lot in the comments. Whenever we talk about wealthy celebrities, people ask, does this even matter? Should we be celebrating billionaires? And that's a fair question. Beyoncé has been vocal about social issues, and there's tension there for some people. But the story is more nuanced. Through her Bayou Foundation, she's donated millions to disaster relief, scholarships, health care support, and community programs. That doesn't erase inequality, but it does show how she's chosen to use her platform and resources. What also stands out to me is how she talks about money herself. She said things like, "No amount of money is worth my peace." She limits touring when her kids are in school. She protects her boundaries. That's not something you hear often at this level, and honestly, that might be one of the biggest lessons here. Wealth, in her case, wasn't about grabbing everything as fast as possible. It was about pacing, control, and sustainability. Now, another thing to consider is how this fits into the bigger picture. Beyoncé is only the 5th musician ever to reach billionaire status. That list is very short for a reason. Fame alone doesn't do it. Talent alone doesn't do it. You need ownership. You need leverage. You need patience. And guess what? This isn't necessarily the end of her story. She's hinted that Renaissance and Cowboy Carter are part of a trilogy. That means there's more reinvention ahead, more risk, more opportunity. So when people say Beyoncé became a billionaire, what they're really saying is that she built an ecosystem. Music feeds touring. Touring feeds films. Films feed brand power. Brand power feeds businesses. And all of it is connected. And, even if none of us are selling out stadiums, there's something here that applies on a smaller scale. Owning your work, understanding where your money comes from, thinking long-term instead of just chasing the next paycheck. Those ideas matter whether you're running a business, freelancing, or planning for retirement. So, yeah, Beyoncé's story is impressive, but it's also instructive. It shows what happens when creativity and financial strategy move together instead of fighting each other. If this made you think a little differently about money, success, or ownership, let me know. Drop a comment, share what stood out to you, or even what surprised you. And if you find value in these kinds of calm, thoughtful breakdowns, feel free to stick around. There's always more to talk about and more to learn together. Please subscribe my channel. Goodbye.